light is really the most important thing in photography. If you don't have good light, you just can't create good photos. So first thing, I do want to teach you one little thing for those of you who want to learn a little technical trick. So please take your phones out.
咁樣咧，光係好重要。如果你冇光咧，基本上你就影唔到任何嘅靚相㗎啦。咁而家開始咧，就教大家一個小 tips， 你攞呢個電話出嚟先。
So again, I told you I'm not going to get technical with this. So this is just a little, just a little tool that I use quite a bit, and we're going to utilize this in this section.
咁而家大家攞個電話出嚟嘅時候咧，就係唔係一個話教你用咩 setting 又點樣去調教，而係咧一個嘅小技巧，係幫大家咧去明白光。
So I realize that, everyone has different phones. I personally use an iPhone, and I know this is a function that is on Androids as well. Unfortunately, I can't tailor this to every single type of phone. So this is probably similar in many phones, but this is going to be an iPhone example, okay?
咁我知道大家咧可能有用唔同嘅智能手機啦，有用蘋果或者有用三星其他嘅電話。咁咧但係基本上咧佢哋應該都會好相似嘅嗰個功能，咁冇辦法係用晒唔同嘅電話同大家介紹啦。而我自己係用蘋果機嘅，但係如果你係用其他Android 嘅作業系統嘅電話咧，其實都應該有相類似嘅功能。
Right, and this is the exposure tool. So let me talk about what that is. So everyone, if you can open your camera app.
咁第一個嘅功能咧就係叫做曝光嘅功能。咁大家攞個電話出嚟啊！
So when you have your camera app open, I think some of you probably already know this, but if you tap on your screen where your subject is, it will focus it there.
咁大家可能都知道㗎啦，就係當你拎個電話出嚟嘅時候，譬如你而家影緊呢一個嘅花瓶，你撳一撳個花瓶嘅時候咧，你就知道嗰個嘅焦點咧就去咗個花瓶嗰度。
If you keep your finger on the screen and slide it up, this increases the exposure. And what exposure is how much light your camera is allowing in.
哇 ，OK。如果你知道唔知道嘅話咧，原來你將隻手指咁樣向上去拉嘅時候咧，你就會增加呢個嘅曝光嘅光度。
And the same way, if you drag it down, it makes the image darker.
咁如果你摸住嗰個嘅鏡面，然後你嘅手指係向下嘅時候咧，個曝光嘅光度咧就會減少啦。所以張相就會暗咗啦。
And if you actually tap on the photo where it's focused and you hold down for 3 seconds, it locks the focus and the exposure. And then if you move it up and down, then it'll stay at that exposure.
咁如果你掂住嗰個物件，然後咧保持住3秒鐘，把持住3秒鐘，咁嗰個嘅曝光咧就會鎖住噶啦。
Right, so you'll see the AE, that means auto exposure, AF, autofocus lock. Do you guys see my cursor?
大家見唔見到你個箭嘴去指住嗰個？見唔見到啊？見到就 thumbs up 啊，唔該。見唔見到啊 ？OK，
見到 right？ OK， 好。
咁你撳住嗰個物件3秒咧，唔單止係嗰個嘅曝光係鎖住，連嗰個嘅焦點咧都係鎖住嘅。
So this is just a little tool because we're going to be talking about light. So we're going to be able to control how much light comes into the camera, and that way you can control how bright and how dark your image is.
咁因為我哋第一個重點咧係講光源，所以咧呢一個嘅曝光咧就好重要。你點樣可以攞多啲光啦？點樣可以減少啲光啦？
Right. So again. And light is the most important aspect of photography. So great, you can control how much light comes in now with your phone. But we need to talk about the quality of the light and the direction of the light.
係啦，咁攝影最重要咧，當然我講咗啦，個元素係光啦，你可以控制有幾多光入嚟，幾多個光係減少幾多個光。咁了解咗個光之後，你又另外有一個好重要嘅重點，關於光嘅咧，就係光嘅質素啦。咩叫光嘅質素咧？
Okay, so the quality of light has to do with well, it has to talk about what kind of light is shooting at your subject, okay? There's a difference between, let's say, a sun, a direct sun, versus maybe some light that's coming from your recessed lighting at home.
咁如果我哋講到光嘅質素嘅時候，就要明白邊類嘅光啦。有一啲咧可能係直接嘅太陽嘅光，有一啲咧亦都係一啲recessed light, you said?
Yeah, or like lamps or something.
哦，即係一啲譬如燈膽嘅光啊，或者係一啲光管嘅光，唔同嘅光。
So the first light we're going to talk about is hard light. Okay, and what is hard light?
第一種叫硬嘅光，乜嘢叫硬嘅光咧？
So hard light is like direct beam of light on a subject that is unfiltered. It means it's like directly coming from a source and it's like shooting straight at you. And it creates a lot of shadows because it's not being diffused by anything.
第一種嘅光叫硬光咧，就係話直接由個光源去照向個物件，係冇經過任何嘅過濾或者一啲柔和嘅，譬如半透明啊，或者一啲嘅反射啊，而係直接照向嗰個影嘅物件嘅時候，呢啲就叫做硬光。
So some examples of that would be if you're outside, like I'm looking outside my window right now, and it's a pretty clear day. It's like direct sunlight.
咁好似如果我而家出去街嘅時候，個天空係冇雲啦，個太陽係直接照落嚟，係直接嘅射光。
Or something like a spotlight. Actually, recessed lighting is kind of like a spotlight as well. But if you're at home, a lot of us have these sort of pendant lights or lamps that are directed.
或者一種光咧叫做一啲聚焦嘅燈光，直接照落嚟嘅。譬如喺你屋企裏邊有一個個圓形嗰啲嘅燈啊，或者係一啲吊燈啊，嗰啲咧都係叫做聚焦嘅燈光。
So hard light is really good at creating high contrast, but a lot of times for photography, especially with your phone, it's probably not the best look because it can add a lot of just a lot of shadows that are not flattering. And it's not great for photography if you don't know how to control it. So you see a lot of times when you shoot outside, you get images that look like this, okay?
咁如果你用呢一啲叫做直接照射嘅燈光或者太陽光嘅時候咧，通常咧就會令到嗰個影啦係好個對比啊，人嘅光同暗嘅對比咧係好強烈嘅。你嘅影咧亦都會好深嘅，咁咧對於我哋影相咧就好難去控制啊，即係嗰個。So
maybe you guys, take photos outside and you're like, oh, it's a very bright day. That's great for photography, right? The answer is actually no, because it's hard light. So you get sort of these eye bag shadows, and the sun is just so harsh. You see a lot of these areas that are uneven. And another example of light would be indoor lighting that I talked about, like the pendant lights, like this girl right here. She's right under, her kitchen or something like that, and you see these heavy shadows.
咁好，我哋以為啦，哇，出邊太陽好好啊，好光啊，咁係咪即係話影相好好咧？其實唔係一定嘅，因為啲光直接嘅照射咧，通常會你見到個人像咧都係嗰個黑與白嘅對比係好強烈，所以變咗咧有一啲嘅情況咧，你就會見到有一個眼袋啦，個黑影喺個眼袋嗰度啦，又好似右邊呢張相咧，呢個女士咧佢係企喺個吊燈下邊，你就睇到咧嗰個光同黑嘅對比咧係太強烈啦。
Right, so there's creative ways to shape this light, but for the most part, in basic photography, it's probably not the best light to use, so I would best avoid it.
咁我自己影相嘅時候，好多時候都避免呢種嘅光源，因為咧就好難去控制啦，亦都咧對於嗰個嘅物件咧就有太強烈同埋太硬嘅嗰種嘅對立啦，嗰個光暗。
So the opposite of hard light would be soft light.
另一種嘅光就係柔和嘅光。
So soft light is a type of light that is more balanced, and it's filtered and diffused through something that creates little or no shadows on the subject. So that normally is more flattering on the subject.
咁通常咧，呢種嘅柔和光線咧係經過一啲嘅過濾嘅，有一啲嘅物件去過濾咗呢啲嘅光，所以佢照落嗰個我哋被影嘅物件嘅時候咧，嗰個嘅物件嘅顏色啦同埋光暗咧就會比較平均。
So examples of soft light would be when you're outside and it's a cloudy day, and maybe you're underneath shade. You're not in the direct sunlight. You're maybe underneath some trees. Or if you're inside, you're in a room, like kind of like my room right now. I have a big window here, and the rest of my room is filled with soft light because it's bouncing around the walls and it's getting diffuse, and there's not heavy shadow around.
柔和嘅光咧就係話，譬如你出到去街啦，個太陽係有雲遮住咗嘅，或者你喺簷篷底下，或者你喺室內，雖然好似而家Erin 個房咁啦，佢隔離有個窗，但係啲光照入嚟嘅室內嘅時候咧，就由啲牆啦同埋其他物品咧，去將嗰啲嘅光咧去平衡咗，所以啲光線咧就比較柔和一啲。
So this was the original image of the hard light on this guy. So now if we move him into the outdoor shade, you see his face is a lot less shadowy. It's just even skin tone now.
正話第一張相咧就係佢喺嗰個直接太陽光底下，所以嗰個光暗咧就好強烈對比，光嘅太光，暗嘅太暗。但係嗰個小朋友如果佢係有一個柔和嘅光線嘅時候咧，你就會睇到佢塊面咧，整個嘅面嘅顏色咧都係比較平均嘅，個光暗咧柔和啲嘅。
Yes. So you can see here that there aren't shadows like the harsh shadows we saw before. In this image of my grandma, you do see a little bit of shadow, but it's really gradual. It's not like a hard shadow. It's softer.
咁好似右邊呢個小朋友嘅樣啦，你睇唔到一啲咧好硬嘅影同埋硬嘅光，整塊面咧嗰個嘅顏色同埋光暗咧都係比較平均同埋柔和。又好似中間咧我婆婆嘅相啦，你睇到佢嘅光咧，雖然喺佢嘅左邊係好光，但係佢個光線咧係慢慢漸進式嘅，去到暗嗰邊就唔會一個太強烈白跟住就黑咁樣嘅光暗對比。
Right. Okay, so a little recap. So hard light versus soft light. I would say try and find the soft light. That's going to be the most flattering light for you guys when you are taking photos on your phone. A lot of times people are, using their phone and they don't understand why the photo doesn't look good. Really, it's just about where you're standing. The quality of light that is shooting your subject isn't good. It's not your fault. It's not your camera's fault. It's just the simple answer of light quality. So you need to be aware of those where you're like what your quality of light is.
咁所以咧呢一個好重要嘅觀念就係嗰個光源嘅質素啊。有時咧我哋話點解我影嘅相唔靚咧？其實唔係你嘅相機嘅問題，亦都唔係你嘅技術問題，只係你企喺邊度嘅問題。你係喺硬嘅光嘅底下，定係你喺嗰啲柔和嘅光嘅底下，咁就會影出一個好唔同嘅相片嗰個嘅效果啦。
Okay, so now that we talked about quality of light, you kind of understand that maybe soft light is the better way to go. It also matters. Oops, forgot I added these. It also matters the direction the light is coming from, because you can have soft light, which is nice, but what if it's coming from the wrong direction? That could really affect the way your photo is.
咁關於光嘅質素咧，另一個除咗話係嗰個硬同軟柔和嘅分別之外咧，光源喺佢喺邊個方向照入嚟，都會影響你嘅相片嘅質素喎。
So I think the number one thing that people do make a mistake in terms of light direction is putting the light behind them. So that's called backlight. Some of you probably know this too. It's called 背光 right?
背光呀。咁有一個咧，大家都好清楚嘅就係話我哋影相咧，會背光。咩叫背光咧？就係光線係從你嘅背邊照過去主體嗰度。
So what happens in 背光 is the light is shining straight at your camera. So our cameras are designed to automatically sense how much light there is. So when light is coming straight in, they're like, oh no, there's too much light. So they're going to want to bring down the exposure automatically. But what happens to your subject is that their exposure also comes down and there's no light on them. So they get all dark. So people, how many of you have taken a photo that looks kind of like this, where the person's all dark?
背光咧就係咁嘅，就係當你嗰個光係 向住個光嘅時候咧，你嘅相機咧自動咧就會去敏感嗰個光源啊，因為佢見到咁光啦，所以佢咧就會將你要影嘅主體咧自然嗰個嘅曝光係減低，所以變咗咧你嘅主體咧就會暗啦，因為個相機以為係好光啦，咁所以點解就會有一個話個主體黑掹掹嘅情況？唔知大家有冇影過咁樣嘅相咧？
Yeah, I mean, there's purposes for shooting with backlight, but I would say that's more advanced. So I would avoid shooting with backlight.
咁其實咧係咪唔會影背光嘅相咧？其實唔係嘅，都會有一啲好有目的性嘅原因咧，我哋會咁樣係對住個光影相。但係咧呢個係比較高級啲嘅攝影技術。咁咧但係喺而家嘅階段咧，我就鼓勵大家唔好背光去影相。
So they're like, okay, backlight's not good, so let's put it right in the front, okay? Let's go front light. So that's why
知道背光唔好啦，咁我哋要影正面光啦。
So this is kind of what would happen if it was front light. What happens is the light is directly shining at the subject, but what can happen is that the image becomes very flat. There's no shadows. The skin tone is absolutely the same all around. It can make for kind of a boring photo.
咁你見到呢個叫正面光，就係個光照住個主體啦。咁個主體係光嘅，但係有一個問題咧，就係比較平面啊，因為光係非常之嘅平均。咁咧咁張相就變咗冇咗一種嘅興趣啦，冇咗一種特色啦，因為整個嘅感覺咧都係比較平面。
Another example is overhead light that is coming right above the subject, okay?
第三個方向咧就叫做頭頂光，就係啲光咧喺頭頂度照落嚟嘅。
And that can be kind of dramatic sometimes, but what it also does is create shadows. It's a very bright top, but then it slowly gets darker and darker, like towards the nose and the mouth and the chin, and then she's in darkness for what she's wearing because it's coming straight from above.
咁頭頂光咧係有佢好處嘅，咁可以咧創造咗一個比較戲劇性啦，比較強烈嘅對比啦，有光暗啦，有影啦。但係你睇到一個壞處咧，就係個光咧上邊就好光，一路落到個面咧就開始好暗啦，甚至去到個衫嘅時候咧，你就失去咗一啲嘅仔細譬如個圖案啦，個衫嘅圖案啦就冇咗啦。
It can also create kind of a flat light, kind of like the front light also, except it's a little bit less dramatic, but it's still not the most flattering light in my opinion.
咁佢亦都有另一個嘅問題咧，就係好似嗰個正面光咁。咁你睇嗰張相咧，就係整體上咧嚟講咧，就比較平面啦，冇咗嗰種特色啦，即係嗰種嘅對比啦，個相片嗰個光暗嘅對比。
So this is an example actually of if light is overhead and it's hard, because we talked about hard and soft light at first, right? So now I'm going to go back to some of those examples we saw. Those are actually examples of overhead and hard light. That's what causes these really intense shadows.
咁如果你嘅光又係硬光，又係頭頂光，兩樣嘢加埋一齊咧，咁個效果咧就好似我正話同大家分享嘅圖片咁，有非常之強烈嘅影啦、黑影啦，同埋咧嗰個面部嘅膚色咧，亦都係非常之唔平均啦，亦都會有黑眼袋啦、黑影喺個眼袋嗰度。
So I would avoid that.
我亦都會避免咁樣去用呢啲嘅光。
So it leads us to my favorite lighting, which is side lighting.
咁我自己比較歡喜用嘅光係咩咧？就係叫側面光。
So it doesn't exactly have to be 90 degrees to the side of the subject, but it's coming from the side. It's not exactly into the front. It's a little bit off to the side of the subject, and this creates a lot of I would say it creates contrast, but it's also still well lit. And because of that, it allows for more soft shadows to be created that really kind of makes interesting, flattering shadows.
我自己點解中意用側面光咧？就係側面光咧，就係平衡晒正話嗰啲嘅優點同埋缺點啦。一方面咧，你有光源進入啦，咁你 喺個皮膚嘅膚色咧就比較均勻，但係同時咧亦都唔會太平均得嚟平面變咗，而係有嗰個嘅光暗嘅對比，所以令到張相咧就會更加有趣味。當嗰啲光照向個主體嘅時候咧，唔係只係好強烈嘅暗同埋光，而係有嗰個嘅對比啦，之餘亦都有一個柔和嘅顏色嘅表達。
Yeah, so these small adjustments to where the subject is relative to the direction of the light can really create more interesting photos for you.
如你將主體嘅角度有少少嘅改變或者轉移咧，亦都會有可以創造咗唔同嘅效果同感覺。
So really it's about what you're going for, but if what you want is a well-lit, interesting photo, I would go with side lighting.
所以如果你想
as much as possible.
如果你想影一張相係有趣味性嘅時候咧，最理想咧就係用側面光啦。咁當然啦，都係取決於你自己有想影啲乜嘢啦。但係如果你用光去決定影一張好嘅相咧，側面光咧嗰個情況咧效果會最理想。
Right. All right. So again, to recap. Main things about light is you have to know the quality and the direction. Okay, if you know those two things, you will be able to move your subject and move into places that give you the optimum conditions to take a good photo.
再有一個少少嘅總結啦，就係光係好重要嘅。只要你知道光嘅質素同埋光嘅方向，咁咧你就可以盡量咁利用你嘅環境去影咗張理想嘅效果嘅相。
Now, a lot of times we can't really control where we are, right? So if you're indoors at night and you have to shoot indoors at night and there's only indoor lighting, you have to kind of analyze, okay, well, where are the areas that I have the best light?
有仗義粉啊，你唔使指就有仗義粉。
當然好多時候咧，你冇辦法去控制嘅光源或者光嘅方向，但係當你譬如係一個室內嘅處境嘅時候，你就要分析下你嗰個室內嘅地方
唔使煮喎，
位置係比較嗰個光咧係比較均勻啊，或者係比較理想嘅，去揾一個嘅。
Like I wouldn't stand right underneath like.
唔係噃，講到仲有喎，側邊。
Can you repeat that, Erin?
Yeah, like if you're indoors and you have a family gathering, don't put the group photo underneath like the kitchen pendant lights or something like that. Maybe move it to the living room where there's a lot of recessed lighting and more light can bounce around.
咁舉一個例子啦，譬如你喺屋企食飯影一張家庭照，咁你就唔好喺飯台燈底下影嗰張合照啦，因為嗰啲咧就係嗰啲硬光同埋頭頂光。咁你咧可能就成家人移去一個地方，可能係客廳，咁有好多嘅嗰啲嘅燈，因為有好多唔同嘅燈，咁嗰啲嘅燈咧就會彼此咧係 bounce off 或者係平均翻嗰個光源。
Yeah, it's softer and more even, correct?
係啦，令到個光源咧就比較柔和翻啲。
And I know people are tempted to be like, okay, well, it's too dark. I'm going to turn on my flash. My general rule is avoid using your flash. You have to pick and choose your battles, and sometimes you just are not in a place where it's an optimal condition for a photo. Turning on the flash, I guarantee you 95% of the time will not be helpful.
我自己咧一個好大嘅提議就係避免去用閃光燈。我哋以為咧閃光燈去補光啦，但係其實好多時候個閃光燈咧就會令到你嗰張相嘅效果係更加唔理想嘅。
Because what it really is on your phone is one direct hard light.
因為閃光燈咧就係直接同埋硬光去照到去個主體嗰度。
So it's a frontal flat light that just makes you look like a ghost, and it's not cute.
嗰個直接嘅硬光咧，令到你嘅面咧會全光，好似個樣就變得好恐怖啦。
Yeah. So if really, if the conditions aren't good, and I would first of all just try and look for a better condition, and if none exists, then sorry.
咁所以咧，我嘅建議就係話，如果你個環境、室內環境或者個暗嘅環境唔係咁理想，去影一張相，我就建議你轉移位置，揾一個光源係比較柔和嘅地方去影相。咁如果你話真係揾唔到嘅話，咁抱歉，你張相點都唔會影得靚㗎啦。
Exactly. So remember what we learned at first with how to adjust the exposure. Once you decide, okay, there's a good quality of light and there's a good direction of light, maybe it's still too dark, that's when you can like adjust your exposure to be like, okay, maybe I can let in a little bit more light here.
咁記得最開始嘅時候，我哋俾大家睇過點樣去調校嗰個嘅曝光，點樣可以加入多啲嘅光，用你嘅電話相機咁去幫助你去補足你嘅光源嘅不足。如果你個室內環境或者影相嘅環境唔係咁理想嘅時候。
Okay, so now that was light, we're going to move on to composition now, okay? So let me have you guys take out your phones again. This is another really important basic function of our phones that I use all the time.
咁第二個今日要同大家分享嘅重點咧，就係構圖啦。咁而家大家拎出個電話，我會同大家介紹咧，你嘅電話嘅一個功能。
Okay, this is turning on your grid lines, okay?
就係你個電話咧，可以去開啟嗰個嘅一啲嘅界線，一啲嘅間隔。
Yes. So Android and Apple has this. What this does is it brings up a 3x3 grid onto your camera screen. And this is going to be really important for what we talk about later on. When the instructions, the ones I have right here, this is for iPhone. So you go to settings, camera, and you just turn on this grid right here. And then this is the instructions for Androids and Samsung.
咁咧其實三星嘅電話即係 Android 啦又好，或者蘋果都好，都有呢一個功能嘅，就係開啟你嗰個間隔嘅界線。咁通常就係呢個339宮格嘅界線。咁呢度咧就係 Android， 係咪 Android 啊 ？Is it Android?
Yeah, Android and Samsung.
呢個就係三星，你點樣開啟嗰個339宮格嗰個界線？咁你哋照住去嗰度開啟佢啊。
Okay, so I'll give you guys a moment here to catch up.
大家可以而家開啟咗嗰個嘅 setting， 然後開咗嗰個間隔。
Okay. So we talked about light, now we're talking about composition. So what is composition?
乜嘢係構圖咧？
Composition is how you choose to arrange the different visual elements in your shot.
構圖就係話我哋應該點樣去放置嗰個相裏邊嘅主體喺嗰個框架上邊，譬如人啊、背景啊嗰啲嘅形狀啊、顏色，點樣去配置咧個構圖？
Right, because like anyone can take their phone out and just press the button and like take a picture of someone, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's a good photo, right? You can make a lot of decisions based on what your composition is to enhance that photo.
我哋影相嘅時候拎出嚟個相機去影人，隨便撳隨便影，咁但係唔代表呢張相係好嘅相。其實咧喺影一張相嘅時候，我哋都要做好多嘅決定嘅，就係點樣去放置、去構圖，將嗰個主體擺喺嗰個框架上邊。
So we're going to be talking about some basic concepts that I utilize all the time in work, and these are things that again you can use in any sort of photography, whether it's people, whether it's food, whether it's landscape. These concepts are just general concepts on how to think about composition.
咁我自己喺
make good compositions.
我自己影相嘅時候咧，好基本嘅呢一個嘅構圖嘅觀念咧，喺我成日影相裏邊都喺我嘅腦海裏邊。咁樣無論你影乜嘢人物又好，物件又好，咁當你去咁樣去思想嘅時候咧，你就會影到好嘅相。
So the first thing we're going to talk about is backgrounds.
第一個咧就係背景啦。
So here is a photo of my sister, and here is another photo of my sister. So
兩張相啦，都係我妹妹，咁有兩個唔同嘅背景。
So which one do you think is better?
邊張靚啲啊？你覺得？左邊啦定右邊啊？左邊嘅舉手啊！你覺得左邊靚啲嘅，可以 raise 你個 hand。
Okay.
Okay.
And it has nothing to do with my actual sister, but the background.
同我妹冇關嘅，我就係想講，你覺得邊個構圖比較好睇啲啫？
Is she in here? So what I want to highlight in this picture is that she's actually standing in the same place, but all she does in one photo versus the other is I tell her to rotate a little bit. Now I want to point out a few things in the first photo on the left, okay?
其實我妹咧係冇喐動嘅，係我個相機去喐動去構將呢幅相去構圖。
So as a photographer, I see the first one and I'm just like cringing already because there's so many things that are distracting to me, like these lights that are sticking out of her head. It's like ears almost.
咁the first one means the left one?
Yes, the left photo.
Okay. 咁第一張相咧，我見到呢張相嘅時候咧，我就發覺哇，有好多嘅嘢喺度喎，又有光啦，又有好多物件啦，譬如我圈住嗰啲，你睇到。
There's just so many things that catch my attention instead when the photo is really, I'm trying to take a photo of her, right?
咁但係即係我其實係影佢啊嘛，但係你見到呢張相嘅背景咧就係好多物件。
So a lot of times people just aren't aware of their backgrounds, and that actually really distracts from what they're trying to take pictures of. So if you're not aware, that can really be the difference between a good photo and a bad photo, even though it's like you moving just a little bit and thinking about, okay, is there anything behind my subject that is taking away from the photo?
有時我哋影相咧就好心急去影個人啦，或者影件物件，就冇留意咧我背景原來咧有一啲令到你要影嘅主體係被分咗嗰個嘅注意嘅一啲嘅物品。咁其實咧，只要你去移動一下咧，咁個背景咧就會有好大嘅變化啦。
Yeah. So that's one big rule is just be aware of what's in the background, eliminate as many distractions as possible. If that means actually taking them out, that's great. But a lot of times if you can't do that, it's really about just moving a little bit to getting a cleaner background.
所以當大家影相嘅時候就要留意啦。其實呢個可以控制嘅，只要你去移動少少咧，原來你個背景咧就可以變得乾淨好多、清澈好多。你要影嘅主體咧就會更加突出啦。
So for me, actually, after I took this photo, I realized, this second photo in the middle is still distracting to me. So another thing you can do is you can even use your subjects and go closer in and make them fill the frame. So it's less distracting because even in the middle photo, I still see some chairs. I see that lamp. I would have just moved that lamp actually. But that's another way to really focus in and take away distraction.
咁你睇第二張相中間嗰張相嘅時候，雖然我已經咧係移咗位啦，但係我發覺我張相嘅背景仲係好多雜物喎，又有凳又有梳化咁。咁於是咧我就影第三張相啦，就係個方法咧就係zoom in 即係放大少少。
Go closer. Let the subject fill the screen.
OK， 就係行近啲嗰個主體，以至咧個主體咧能夠喺個構圖裏邊咧佔大部分嘅位置，以至咧嗰個雜物喺背景咧就係減少。
Yeah. Another thing about backgrounds is sometimes you just need to be patient. Okay. Oh, sorry. I have to talk about this first. This is another example of just moving like one foot. You see in the first photo, behind the subject, the trees are sticking out of his head, right? And then in the second photo, if the photographer just moves like a little bit, there you get a clean background and there's a greater contrast and you see the subject more clearly.
咁第二張圖我想解釋俾你聽，點解留意咧嗰個重要咧就係好似呢張相啦，左邊嗰張相，你見到嗰棵樹喺嗰個嘅人像嗰個頭頂喎，咁其實原來你喐少少咧。你就會有一個冇阻礙嘅背景啦，個天空就會個構圖咧就會有一個比較明顯係影你嘅主體啦。
Yeah, and that's the beauty with like your phone, right? It's so little, you don't have to move that much. Like you can just walk like a few feet, and that makes all the difference. So back to what I was saying about. Oh, go ahead.
只要你行1尺咧，其實你就已經有一個好大嘅對比啦。甚至你可能只係移動你個電話就有一個好大嘅分別啦個背景。
And the thing I was talking about earlier was waiting for the right moment. So again, here are 2 photos. Same place, but one photo is a lot less distracting, right? Sometimes we are, I don't know, on vacation or something like that, and there's just like a lot happening. It really pays to think about, okay, what's happening in my background? Is there an opportune moment that is better than if I shot it, you know, right now with, I don't know, a trolley coming behind? So this photo of Miriam, there's like a truck and a car behind her, and they're really distracting, right? But if I waited, this photo on the right, I waited maybe like 5 seconds afterwards and I shot it. It's so much cleaner. It's so much more captivating to me because there's less distractions.
咁所以大家留意個構圖個第一樣嘢背景嘅時候咧，咁你譬如去vacation 去旅行啦，好多時候我哋都好匆忙嘅，好趕嘅，咁就影，咁但係冇留意咧，原來個背景有好多個雜物，好似左邊張相就有架 minivan 經過，就將個主體嘅注意咧係分散咗。但係其實有時你只要留意多幾秒鐘，俾多3、4秒鐘。去等個黃金機會即刻影咧，原來咧你就會有一張好唔同效果，一個好清晰嘅背景，唔會將個主體咧嘅注意咧係分散，有一張更加好嘅構圖。
Yeah, so always think about how you can eliminate distractions. Another way you can do that is using space.
第二個方法咧就係去另一個好嘅構圖咧就係點樣去利用空間。
So if you surround your subject with empty space, or what we call negative space, it really it simplifies and makes the frame look minimal so that your subject really pops.
咁乜嘢叫做空間咧？其實如果你嘅主體喺嗰個嘅環境裏邊，四圍都係好潔白嘅，係冇雜物嘅，咁你會造成一個咧比較簡潔嘅效果啦，一個主體咧比較鮮明嘅效果。
So an example, let's say I'm taking a picture of a tree. I'm looking at this photo and my eyes are going everywhere. I'm like, wow, where do I even begin to look? There's so many leaves.
咁你睇到呢張相啦，佢係冇空間嘅，因為成個嘅構圖都係樹枝、樹葉。我隻眼咧好似四圍望，四圍都有嘢望咁樣。
Which isn't a bad thing, by the way. If that's the purpose of the photo, that's great. But let's say you really want to highlight the leaves. Maybe something that looks more like this is better suited for that because now your attention is drawn straight to the leaves, straight to the color because there's so much space.
咁先頭嗰張相其實唔係話唔好，只不過睇下你張相嘅目的係乜嘢，係咪要去將注意力放喺一個嘅重點上邊？如果係嘅咁嘅時候咧，一個嘅構圖，如果佢背景係有清晰嘅背景係比較潔白嘅時候咧，人嘅注意力咧就可以睇到呢幾塊嘅樹葉，呢幾個樹枝，咁個構圖就唔同啦。
So really space lets your photo breathe, and sometimes less is more because the emphasis is put in the places that really want them to. So at first, when I had my sister in the kitchen, there was like all this stuff happening. There's chairs in the background, there's lights. But then I moved her all the way in front of a wall where there was nothing else. And in this picture, it's very clear that the subject is just her.
所以當你要突出一個主體嘅時候咧，其實少就係好啦，簡潔就係好啦。好似我正話影我妹啦，你睇佢本來喺sofa 嗰度嘅，咁我發覺如果我係要突出佢嘅時候，我將佢移去一個背景係冇任何雜物嘅地方，咁佢就好突出啦。
Some other examples of that, of space, are this picture of seal apps.
嗱，另一個嘅例子就係燒鴨。如果你要令到人垂涎欲滴，淨係睇到燒鴨咧，個背景最好冇雜物啦。
Exactly. An example of that is this picture of this tree.
又好似呢棵樹啦，呢個主體就係呢一棵好優美嘅樹啦。咁佢
You can't choose yeah, to shoot this up close, like that's a choice, right? You can go up right next to it, shoot it up there, but this is a choice to stand further away and let so much sky be in the background to really highlight, wow, this is like one lonesome tree. This is the highlight of my photo.
所以其實呢個係完全係個人嘅選擇。如果你想去突出一棵好靚嘅樹，你可以其實係企埋去嘅。不過佢係唔係會有一個好強烈嘅對比，係咪能夠突出咧？咁我就選擇行開啲，企遠啲，然後去有一個清晰嘅背景，以至呢棵樹能夠突出。
This is another photo, very minimal. Just 3 of my friends walking on the beach, really highlighting them and how early in the morning it was. There's no one else there. So that space gives you the focus to just look at them walking away.
呢個構圖咧亦都係好簡潔，因為我選擇咧就係好似一個清晨，一個好早嘅早上。呢個構圖咧個背景係好清、好潔白。咁所以咧我嘅注目咧就會喺我個3個朋友上邊啦。
You can also do this with portraits. I shot this of a chef, and really the highlight was just about him, so I didn't want any distracting things in the kitchen. So this is just another utilization of a lot of empty space around him to put the focus on him.
呢一個亦都係另一個嘅例子啦，點樣去運用一啲嘅潔白嘅空間，令到我去突出呢個廚師。我唔係要影佢廚房，我係要影呢個廚師，所以我揀一個咧好簡潔、好潔白。有好多嘅叫做 negative space， 一啲負面嘅空間，以至咧呢一個主體能夠被突出。
And this is another example of that, just to really highlight the bride.
另一個例子啦，去突出呢一個嘅新娘。
So that was space. So now we're going to talk about framing. So like empty space, like negative space, frames also help us focus on our subject. And they shout out like, hey, look at this. We're framing the subject within the frame of our photograph.
另一個嘅構圖嘅觀念咧，就叫做結構，一個 framing 啊，即係框住個主體，用一啲嘅物品啦，去突出呢個主體，就係透過嗰個framing， 透過嗰個框架。
Yeah, if you look around you, there's actually a lot of natural frames in the world.
其實喺
natural and handmade. Yeah.
喺我哋嘅環境咧，有好多自然嘅框架嘅。
Yeah, we get arches, we get doorways, we get trees, bridges, all sorts of things.
譬如好似門框啦、樹啦、啲拱門啦、橋啦，呢啲都係一啲框架嚟嘅。
So let me show you some examples.
舉個例子。
So in this photo, we see the subject in the center, but they're framed around by the various arches, right? So this further highlights them as the subject because you see them in a frame within a frame within a frame.
好似呢一個啦，我要突出呢一對夫婦係一個主體，咁但係你見到咧嗰個個拱門啦，其實就嗰個框架啦，而且咧係有3、4個一個隧道咁樣嘅效果嘅框架，以至咧呢個 couple 呢個夫婦咧能夠更加突出，成為嗰個相嘅主體。
Another example would be using a bridge. It's kind of like a natural arch that was built, and I put the people right under it to highlight them.
另一個例子就係橋啦，好似呢一張相啦，嗰個橋喺上邊，而嗰個嘅夫婦咧就喺嗰個橋底下邊，佢就被突出嚟啦。
And in this one, this was an interesting way I framed it. I used this line here to kind of separate this section out and put the couple right inside.
呢一張相咧其實幾特別嘅，因為我睇到呢一個線條啦，呢一埲牆嘅線條啦，好似一個一個彎曲嘅一個拱形咁樣，然後咧就將呢一個嘅夫婦擺喺嗰度，好似將佢哋咧去同咗個背景分隔咗出嚟。
Exactly. This photo was taken when I was in Jordan, and this was a natural frame that happened with the rocks. So it kind of created this little window, a little sliver where I wanted to highlight the architecture.
呢一度咧係喺約旦影嘅相。當我見到呢一個嘅大石喺左邊，右邊其實都係大石，而我想突出中間呢一個嘅建築物，我就用咗呢2嚿大石咧去構造咗一個中間嘅一個窗戶，以至咧呢一個嘅建築物咧喺中間被突出嚟。
Right. And then here, there are some trees that created a little window. So again, these are decisions that you make as you're looking at something, right? Are there things around you that can further highlight the subject? And for this photo, there are trees around, and if you just moved into a window of branches that really kind of framed the image, it really made for a stronger subject, I think.
呢張相咧，大家睇到就係嗰啲嘅樹咧，就係嗰個嘅框架啦。我要突出中間呢個島呢一個嘅堡壘咁樣咧，咁其實咧就係利用嗰個大自然嗰啲嘅樹去將呢一個嘅主體去突出嚟。
Okay, so that moves us into a very, very important rule in photography, and this is where at first when we were turning on the grids, this is going to come very in handy.
咁而家嚟到咧第3點咧，一個喺構圖上邊好重要嘅一個觀念，亦都咧大家可以利用呢一個3分法呢個9宮格咁樣咧，去將你嘅相去構圖。
So let me explain a little bit. The rule of thirds is after you have divided your frame into the 3x3 grid that we're talking about, it talks about how the intersection of those lines, and let me show you what I mean by that. So you should look like this when you're in your camera. You should have this grid.
咁我而家解釋下俾大家聽點樣用嗰個9宮格。
The 4 intersection points of these lines, and actually the 4 lines themselves, are where subjects or strong compositional parts of the photograph can be placed to create a very strong and balanced photo.
就係你睇到呢度有4點啦，即係4條線，佢哋嘅交叉嗰個嘅4個交叉嘅intersection，即係嗰個係乜嘢？中文？
個 intersection 咯。
係啦，intersection 即係個交接位啊，嗰個 junction 即係嗰個交接位嗰度嗰4點咧，就係當你去擺你嘅主體嘅時候咧，好重要嘅位置嚟嘅。
So let me show you. So this is a photo of my sister. So I placed her and her whole body along the intersection of those lines.
我就將佢擺喺右第一個點喺右上角嘅第一個 intersection 嗰個交接位。
And then the pillow is on the other two.
咁另外嗰個嘅枕頭啦，嗰個就係放喺另外嗰個兩個左邊嗰兩個交接位。
So this is the end result of that photo.
咁呢個咧就係嗰張相嘅效果啦，就係嗰兩個枕頭啦，同埋我妹妹咧就係就喺嗰4個交接位嘅嗰個嘅地方。
So I mean, you can choose to put the person anywhere you want, but for some reason, just I don't know exactly why the psychology of it, but it just feels balanced and interesting when things are placed using the rule of thirds.
咁點解會張相會睇起嚟個效果會比較好啲咧？
舒服啲，
舒服啲咧，嗰個構圖會舒服啲咧。我都唔明白嗰個心理係點嘅，但係當你嗰個主體係擺喺嗰4點嘅交接位嘅時候咧，個相嗰個構圖就會平均啲，睇起嚟咧就會舒服啲。
So back to that image that I shot earlier. I don't know if you guys noticed, but this actually also utilized the rule of thirds. She isn't centered. She's a little bit to the left, and her eye and the hands, they're along the first line using the rule of thirds.
咁我影呢張相嘅時候咧，其實個構圖亦都係咁樣嘅。我將佢嘅眼咧就係擺喺其中一個交接位啦，佢嘅手咧就係 rule of thirds, right?
Yeah, rule of thirds.
What means by rule of thirds?
So the image is kind of separated into 1/3. So like 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 into 3 sections. So yeah, you kind of place them along the lines that create the thirds.
OK， 所以你睇到嗰張相好似1/3、1/3，咁佢嘅手咧就喺下邊嘅1/3。咁所以佢唔係完全喺個相嘅中間嘅，其實佢係喺嗰個左上角嗰個 intersection 嗰個交接點嘅時候，咁佢係傾向左邊嘅個人。
Also, I talked about if you place strong lines along the rule of thirds as well, it creates a nice balanced image. So for here, the lighthouse is along this intersection here and along this line, and also the horizon line is following this line here.
咁大家睇到咧，嗰個1/3啦，即係個地啦，嗰個島啦，個島咧喺1/3下邊嗰度。咁啱咧，嗰個唔係咁啱嘅，係佢嘅決定嚟嘅。即係嗰條線咧，亦都係掂到個水平線，而嗰個嘅燈塔咧就喺嗰個 intersection， 即係個交接點左上邊嗰一點嗰度。
Yeah, so this is another example of that. You can't tell right now exactly, but when you put the grid on it, there's a reason. I chose to put this along this door frame here, along this line. I chose to put the food right here on this 1/3 below this line. And the shadow is here as well along this line.
Wow. 咁佢呢一幅圖咧，又係佢利用呢一個嘅9宮格啦，將嗰個門框咧就喺嗰個1/3喺右邊嘅1/3，而嗰一碟嘅餅啦，就係喺嗰個嘅交叉點，嗰個嘅交接點，而左邊嗰個嘅影啦，嗰個一直嗰個影咧就喺另一邊嘅1/3。
And this photo of my grandparents, they're placed along this top 1/3 line here, so their heads are the intersection of those lines.
嗱，你見到我嘅爺爺嫲嫲啦，佢哋咧就係喺佢嘅眼啦，佢嘅即係個 head 嗰度咧就喺上邊嘅1/3嗰條線。
And this isn't exact, but it's the concept behind it. Like, it's not like I have to get right on the intersection, right on the dot for it to be a good photo or anything like that. But this is just the concept of being like, you know what, I'm not going to put I'm going to intentionally put my subjects around this area for a more balanced photo.
咁當然我唔係話哇全部都係咁仔細，一定要譬如婆婆個眼要掂到嗰一點，或者爺爺個頭又要個眼又要掂到另一點，即係但係大概係一個嘅指引我哋點樣去構圖用呢一個9宮格。
Last example here. This photo was taken for a client, and this was also utilizing the rule of thirds. I wonder, before I add the lines, I wonder if you can already spot out how it's utilizing it.
你呢個咧呢張相咧係一張阿 Erin 幫佢一個嘅客戶影咗一張嘅專業嘅相，佢哋都咧係利用咗呢個9宮格嚟去構圖嘅。唔知大家睇唔睇到佢個構圖係點樣用呢個9宮格咧？
So this is here where the peak action is. So this is right along the intersection.
右上角嗰嗰啲豆咧跌落嚟嗰度咧，就係啱啱就係擺喺嗰個十字嗰個嘅交叉點嗰度啦。
And the food really is centered around this horizon here.
咁而呢一碟嘅菜啦，就係喺呢一條線啱啱嘅中間嗰條嘅線。
I wanted to point out that this image also utilizes some negative space as well, right? Like there's nothing here in the background, it's just all dark. So it really draws your attention to where, you can have the choice. You can be like, oh, I could put a pepper grinder here. I could put some, a thing of flowers or whatever, but that may actually be distracting from the action, right? So those are decisions that you can make as a photographer to make your image stand out more.
咁你睇到咧，呢一度亦都利用咗一個好重要嘅觀念，就係用嗰個清晰嘅背景，即係個背景咧係冇任何嘅雜物。咁係一個叫 negative space， 一個冇任何雜物，係一個清晰嘅背景。咁個目的咧就係要將嗰個主體去突出，而個主題咧就係有一啲嘅活動進行緊，就係放緊啲豆。咁當然啦，呢個都係你嘅決定嚟嘅。我要唔要擺支花喺個背景？會唔會擺一樽胡椒粉喺個背景？咁但係呢個決定咧就會影響有幾多嘅注意係放喺你嘅主題嗰度啦。
So that goes back to when you're taking pictures at your house or your dinner or whatever, you look at your background and be like, is there anything I can take out? Because that's a decision you can make. Is there something that doesn't need to be there? You can make your photos so much better by just simply taking stuff out a lot of times.
咁所以每一張相都係一個決定嚟嘅。咁如果你喺屋企影相嘅時候啊，我可唔可以拎走我背後嗰啲嘢咧？以至嗰張相咧個主體係會更加突出。咁呢個咧亦都係你嘅決定啦。
And that leads us to lines. Those are very important.
咁咧而家咧我哋就講到線啦，線條喺構圖裏邊線條嘅重要性。
It's because our eyes naturally want to follow lines in photos.
點解線條咁重要咧？因為我哋嘅眼光啦，我哋視線係好自然就會跟住啲線條嘅方向嚟望嘅。
So really, if you want your viewer to look at something, place them along a line or at the end of a line for a lot of attention power.
咁如果你想你嘅人睇你嘅相咧，睇個主體嘅時候咧，你就自然咧就將個主體咧就係放喺嗰條線嗰度。
So for example, this is another photo I took of my sister in our house. You notice that there's all of these lines from our siding.
咁好似呢張相啦，我影我妹妹啦，你睇到兩邊牆咧有好多嘅線，咁我咧就將我妹妹咧放喺中間。
So all of those lines draw my eye towards her in the middle.
所以咧，我嘅妹妹咧就會吸引到我嘅注意力啦，因為嗰啲嘅線啦就引導我嘅要睇呢張相嘅人咧去到我妹妹嗰度。
This is another example of that. This is also in Jordan. You see, I don't know actually, do you guys see where the leading lines are? Where does your eye get drawn to?
大家睇唔睇到嗰啲導向線喺邊度咧？呢張相我喺約旦影嘅，睇到。
So these lines lead into the middle, back into the road where everyone is walking. So it just draws my attention back to the center because the lines are all leading there.
咁好明顯，我嘅主題咧就係嗰啲行緊嘅遊客啦，而嗰啲嘅線咧就指向我中間嘅要影嘅呢個主體啲遊客。
Another portrait utilizing leading lines. They're pointing all at her. My eye is drawn that way.
我嘅視線咧好自然咧就係向住呢一個嘅女仔啦，因為左邊咧就有一啲嘅導向線指住佢。
And they don't always have to be straight. In this image, do you see where the leading lines are? Oh, I guess I already revealed it.
呢一張相咧，雖然啲線唔係直嘅，但係有時啲彎嘅線，佢向住個方向咧，都係可以導向我哋嘅視線。
So you place subjects along leading lines to draw attention. That's the main.
所以你可以將你嘅主題咧擺喺嗰啲嘅導向線嘅線上邊，以至咧佢哋吸引到嗰個嘅注目。
Now look at this one. Do you guys see kind of lines in this one as well?
大家睇唔睇到呢張相嘅導向線喺邊度啊？
So these lines are also leading to the subject, towards the middle. There's motion in that, and my eyes are drawn in because these lines are coming in.
咁啲線咧，你睇到喺斜上嘅同埋左右咧，都係導向呢一個中間嘅主題。
Oh, I'm so bad at making PowerPoints. Okay, so the next line we're going to talk about is horizontal lines. And horizontal lines, I think, are my favorite because I utilize them basically in like every single one of my images. But they're important because they create a sense of calm and stability in photos.
咁跟住就係水平線啦，我自己最中意咧就係用水平線，因為咧呢個水平線咧幫我哋喺影嘅相裏邊咧能夠穩定同埋平衡我哋嘅構圖。
So you look at this image, and it just feels really serene. I think if it were not for this horizon line, it would feel a lot more chaotic. But you can see how when you're taking photos, utilizing those grid lines to make sure the horizon is flat can really make the image go from just all right to wow, that feels nice.
咁我中意用呢個平衡線啦，好似係你睇呢張相啦，真係會俾你一種咧感覺好寧靜啦，好恬靜啦。咁如冇咗呢個平衡線嘅時候咧，可能就會更加張相可能會變咗一種混亂。咁我好中意用嗰個三格嗰個9宮格啦，而你睇到嗰個1/3咧就係個平衡線，嗰個3/3嗰條線咧就喺呢個平衡線上邊啦。
Yeah. always have to put it on the 三分之一嗰條線嗰度，但係你用嚟做 reference 咯。Like you use it for reference to flatten your horizon line. So this is another example of how I was shooting very cautiously with a horizon line that is flat. It creates just order, and I like that. I like that the squares are fully flat. I like that the banner behind him is flat. I like that his grill is flat. It just creates stability.
我好刻意嘅係影呢一啲嘅水平線，呢啲係平線，因為咧可以能夠令到張相咧有一種好穩定同埋平衡嘅感覺。
This next example is one I took of in Galilee. And I think this really is a good example of this because if you look at the photo, there's birds everywhere. It could be very chaotic, but because of this constant horizon line, I think it provides a sense of calm to the photo.
呢一個係一個好好例子啦，我喺以色列嘅加利利海影嘅。咁你睇到咧好多雀仔、海鷗喺度飛嚟飛去，咁呢張相其實可以好混亂嘅，但係因為咧我係將一個嘅平衡線專登擺喺張相嘅構圖裏邊，所以咧就將整個嘅相片咧就穩定落嚟，平衡咗落嚟。
So to give you an example, let's say I didn't do that. Let's say I shot it like this. You're kind of like, oh, that doesn't feel good. Like, is she falling off the boat? Were the birds attacking her? Like, there's no stability in this photo because the horizon line isn't straight. And that's something that I think as humans we understand, but like when you actually verbalize it in photography terms, it's so important to really keep your lines straight because there's like order and there's stability in that.
咁我專登咧影呢一張相去對比正話先前嗰張相，就係呢一張相咧就冇一個平衡線喺個構圖裏邊。咁睇起嚟咧就哇係咪呢個攝影師影緊張相嘅時候係俾啲雀仔攻擊佢咧，所以佢失去咗平衡咧？咁所以佢專登咧就要將個平衡線去揾嗰條平衡線，以致咧佢張相嘅構圖咧能夠俾嗰個嘅讀者睇到嘅時候係一種平衡啦同埋穩定性。
Great. So now we're talking about vertical lines.
跟住我哋講垂直線。
Vertical lines are really helpful in also creating a sort of stability, but it really denotes a lot of strength and order as well in photography. And I'll give you an example of that.
垂直線咧能夠俾穩定同埋加強嘅作用。舉個例子。
There's a sort of strength and grandeur to looking at trees that are just standing straight up.
咁你睇啲樹嘅時候咧，就會有一種感覺，哇，好似好好宏偉啊咁樣。
So it's important for me to always, and this is with editing too, which is a whole other thing, but to make sure that the lines that are leading up are straight. I just like it when things are like 90-degree angle. For me, it's the strength, it's the stability, it's the calmness of the photo that I think makes all the difference.
你影嘅時候咧，肯定佢咧係垂直嘅90度嘅時候咧，就會令張相咧有一種穩定嘅感覺。
Same thing with buildings. You can take a photo. Again, these are not like these are subjective because it's not that if you don't have a straight line, your photo is horrible. Sometimes using slanted lines has its purposes, but I'm just trying to show you the concept of like utilizing vertical lines in a way that can really enhance the photo. So with buildings, normally I try to take them in a way where the lines are all straight and vertical to again ground the photo, give it that sense of stability and order.
咁當然呢個係好主觀嘅，有時你影個相個線係歪嘅、斜嘅，可能係有你嘅目的嘅，有原因嘅。咁但係一個普通嘅情況之下咧，通常我影嘅相咧都盡量咧去令到個構圖嘅線咧係直嘅，以至咧張相咧能夠有一個秩序同埋有一個嘅穩定性。
Great. So this is kind of a recap. Leading lines, they lead to your subject. They really highlight and put focus on it. Horizontal lines give you calm, stability. Don't look like you're falling off the boat like I was in that one photo. For vertical lines, they provide strength and order. And then at first, diagonal lines, they denote movement, action. So in that photo of me at Galilee, when it was all crooked, you're left wondering, is something moving? Is she moving? What's the action? What's happening there?
咁我做一個小總結咧，就係有4類嘅線啦，導向性嘅線啦，即係有啲嘅線咧就係引導大家嘅視線咧向住主題。第二種咧就係叫水平線，有一個平衡嘅張相，俾佢一種咧穩定性。咁第三種咧就係垂直線，可以加強嗰個嘅秩序啦，令佢咧有一種加強嗰個穩定嘅作用。仲有咧就係斜嘅線，就好似加利利海嗰個情況啦。係咪嗰度有啲嘅活動進行緊咧？有啲即係如果你影嗰個時候，就會發覺嗰張相係咪有啲嘅動作，有啲嘅活動喺度咧咁樣。
And that's not a bad thing, by the way. That example was a bad example of that scene. But if it really were a photo of something that had action in it, like using diagonal lines is good because it emphasizes the action.
所以斜嘅線唔係唔好嘅，因為如果你要影嘅主題咧，你係想話俾人聽有啲嘅活動，有啲movement 有啲行動進行緊，咁嘅時候咧，嗰啲斜嘅線咧就可以加強嗰個效果啦。
Okay. So the last thing I want to talk about is symmetry and patterns, because this is also something that's very captivating and interesting in photography. So symmetry in photography is achieved when you kind of have like a mirror, where two sides of an image hold the same weight or similar weight.
最後咧就係構圖裏邊嘅一種叫做對稱嘅構圖係點樣咧？
So there's different types of symmetry. There's horizontal symmetry, vertical symmetry, and radial symmetry.
咁有幾種嘅係橫向平衡，就係上下兩半對分啦；豎向嘅平衡，即係垂直嘅兩邊啦；或者咧有一種叫做放射性嘅，好似個陽光太陽咁發出嚟，由中心點向四周放發。
So let me give you some examples. So this image I took of a friend up in DeYoung, you see that he's staring out the window, but you also see him reflected on the other side.
咁呢一種咧就係其中一種嘅平衡嘅構圖啦。
So this would be vertical symmetry, right? Because the left and the right of the photo are even. They're balanced in this image. And it's just interesting because it feels nice because there's balance in the photo.
咁呢一個就好明顯就叫豎向，因為咧佢係左同右垂直嘅，咁你睇到咧佢喺鏡裏邊嘅倒影。
This is another example of that. These are just some homes in the sunset. We see these all the time. But they kind of mirror each other, so I thought that was really, really interesting.
呢一個又係一個豎向嘅構圖啦。
This is an example of what? This is horizontal symmetry.
呢個就係橫向啦，係咪啊
？Because it's mirrored on the other side. And it doesn't always have to be reflections. Reflections are obviously a really easy way to achieve symmetry, but sometimes it's like the weight of what's happening in the image. So I'll give you the example of this picture of my sister again. So this was leading lines.
對稱咧唔係成日一定都要係水嘅倒影啊、鏡嘅倒影嚟嘅喎，好似我妹妹呢張相。
There is symmetry here. Like you see, the background mirrors each other. So sometimes in the background you see, oh wow, there's actually balance on both sides. You can place your subject in the middle of that to make it look like a symmetrical photo in the background.
好似呢一張相啦，左右嗰個背景咧就好似一個對稱咁樣啦。
And actually top and bottom.
同埋上下，因為嗰個天花板同埋個地。
Exactly. Now this would be an example of some radial symmetry, right? There's something that's interesting about this because everything around the image feels balanced. I think it's a hobby, right? How's that like?
由中心點放射性嘅一個對稱。
And this would be another sort of example of symmetry and a pattern. You see a lot of the same thing, but they're placed in a way that feels balanced.
呢一個咧係一個亦都係一個放射性嘅一個對稱啦，將啲嘢排列啦，好整齊啦。
So, This is another example of shooting architecture with symmetry that's radial. Sometimes we see windows or churches and things like that, and it's interesting to look up and see what sort of symmetry you can find in architecture.
通常咧喺建築物咧，你都會發現有好多嘅模式啦，一啲嘅平衡啦，同埋對稱嘅。咁你留意下嘅時候咧，譬如呢個教堂嘅天花嘅時候，你就會發覺有呢個放射性嘅對稱啦。
And this is obviously a choice as well, because you can shoot it from a different angle, and it wouldn't be symmetry. It would be, it would be an oval because you're at a different angle. So really, a lot of it is finding symmetry and positioning yourself in a way that you can find visually the symmetry points.
咁當然呢個亦都係你嘅決定嚟嘅，係一個主觀嘅選擇嚟嘅。如果你想去影一個構圖係有呢一個嘅對稱咧，你就要去揾一個位置咧，去揾到嗰啲嘅平衡點、嗰啲嘅線、嗰啲嘅對稱嘅。
Exactly. Okay. So those are some important aspects of composition that I use a lot. I'll just give a little recap. These are just, again, some of the components of creating good composition. And you can use any combination of these in your photos. It doesn't always have to be about symmetry. You don't always have to use rule of thirds. You can utilize these in different ways by yourself.
咁今日有個少少嘅總結咧，就係點樣去有一張唔同嘅構圖係有你嘅決定嘅。咁譬如你嘅背景啦，你點樣用空間啦，你點樣用框架啦，點樣用1/3嗰個9宮格嘅一個嘅線條個框架啦，你點樣用線條啦，直線、橫線、導向線，或者最尾係用嗰個對稱嗰個嘅模式，無論係豎向或者橫向。
Mm-hmm. Okay, so just a little review of what we learned today. So those are the two main things. We're talking about light, and we talked about composition. And I want to wrap up soon so you guys can ask questions if you want. I know it's like a little bit over already. But again, with light, we're talking about quality of light. If we have hard light, it's normally going to be uneven skin tone, really harsh shadows. We use soft light, it's going to be a lot more even, a lot more flattering. So hard light, again, is like the sun, spotlights. Soft light would be cloudy day outside because it's diffused by the clouds, inside a bright room with big windows, situations like that.
咁最後嘅總結咧就係光啦，大家記得硬光啦，同埋呢一個柔和嘅光啦。硬光咧就會造成強烈嘅光暗對比，而柔和嘅光咧個面嘅即係話個主體嘅光咧就會比較平面啦。
Mm-hmm. And then we have to remember the direction of the light, right?
同埋我哋講過方向，光嘅方向。
Backlight, front light, overhead light, side light, different purposes for different situations, but for I think most of our situations, getting some good side light is ideal. Side light or front light would be ideal.
我哋講過背光啦、正面光啦、頭頂光啦，同埋側邊光，而側邊光咧係最理想嘅。
Okay. And again, that was the compositional recap. We don't have to go through that again. I just wanted to actually open this up for some engagement now because we looked at some photos already that I gave examples of. I want you guys now to point out maybe some of the compositional components that you now see in some of these photos. And if you guys can just type them in the comment section, just type out whatever you see that you think makes this photo, or what compositional things you see in this photo.
咁而家想大家咧有啲參與喎，我而家俾啲相大家睇，你睇下你睇到啲乜嘢嘅構圖，咁你就打入去嗰個 chat room 嗰度。
Okay, do you guys remember what we talked about here?
記唔記得呢個係點樣構圖啊？你可以打入去嗰個 chat room 嗰度嘅。線 lines.
Yep, there are definitely lines here.
Symmetry.
Yes.
Horizontal lines and symmetry. Space.
Yes.
Line.
Yes.
Some leaning lines, directional lines.
Yes.
And beautiful people.
Yes. Agreed.
Greed.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, if you guys notice, this line here actually is along the rule of thirds.
Yeah， 呢條線咧就係嗰個1/3啦，睇到。
Because if you imagine another one up here, right?
Yeah,
and actually these
呢度應該有另一條1/3嘅線。
Very good. Good job.
非常好。
How about this photo?
呢一張咧 ，space.
Yeah.
Grid.
Yeah. Yeah.
Lighting. Framing. Background.
Fiction. That's really good.
Patient is a good one.
Good. Yeah. Anything else? Oops.
有冇其他？
I'm trying to look at it again. Actually, I think this line here also is kind of the dividing line for symmetry. So there's a top half and a bottom half.
咁你睇到呢個牌後邊呢條中間線咧，就係啱啱將嗰個對稱咧係突出嚟嘅上同下。
And she's along, her face is actually along this line, so it kind of draws my face. It draws my eyes to her face here.
亦都係一條導向線啦，因為將佢個笑容同嗰條導向線連結起嚟。
Yes, great.
Good backlighting, beautiful smile and focus.
Very good. I think I explained a little bit about this one too.
Yeah, you did.
So, yeah, for this one, again, it was rule of thirds. There were, the grid was used. These are very strong vertical lines. And this is just, again, when I told you I always make sure my lines are straight, this is just an example of that. Like, it really kind of bothers me when, like...
嗱，呢張相亦都用咗好多嘅觀念啦，譬如好垂直、好直嘅線啦，1/3啦。
Exactly. Okay, how about this one?
呢張咧用咗啲乜嘢嘅好重要嘅一啲觀念啊？Side lighting, clean background.
Yes. Yes.
Soft lights.
Yes.
Grid.
Yep. Very good. And
release.
真面光啦，係咪？
係真面光 ，yes。
面光 And also, this is another like again, I like vertical lines.
直
This
線啦
line, yeah. This one?
呢張咧 frame
呢張係嗰個框啊，嗰啲框門框啊。
係啦，框架 framing。Frame within frame.
Yeah.
Baby.
There's also anything else? There's Bobo. Lines. Yeah. What kind of lines?
What kind of lines? Yeah, lines. What kind of lines?
Yeah.
咩線啊？用咗線係用咩線啊 ？Vertical.
Yeah.
And soft light. A
Yeah.
bit of symmetry.
Yeah. There's symmetry.
Vertical.
Exactly.
Vertical lines.
Yep. Great. Love it. You guys are so good.
Yeah, well
How
trained.
about this one?
呢張咧，大家未睇過呢張咧
嗰啲平衡
Symmetry. Horizontal
水平線
symmetry.
Hi.
Space.
Yeah. Can you guys tell I like space? I really like space.
Lines leading to subject. Grid.
Yes. Is that everything?
Soft light.
Actually, this would actually be an example of hard light.
其實
Because
係硬光，
yeah, because they're basically all in shadow.
因為佢哋成個都係黑色嘅。
Yeah, this wouldn't be soft because you would be exposing for this water here, which I would guess would be very bright, and then so that would bring them very, very dark. But that's also probably an
因為
editing.
個曝光喺個水嗰度啦，好光啦，所以啲人咧就會變成一個好黑嘅對比啦。
Asymmetry composition. Well, in essence, the rule of thirds makes something asymmetrical.
其實咧1/3呢一個觀念咧，令到張相嘅構圖咧係比較冇咁對稱嘅。
because sometimes, yeah, like this would be very, very symmetrical. They're in the center, even where their hands meet, like imagine like a line that like separates it. Like it feels like both sides of the image are equal.
其實呢張相咧係一個對稱嘅相，唔係一個1/3嘅相嚟嘅。
Yeah. And even though this photo, let's say, is symmetrical along the horizon, the horizontal symmetry, vertically it's not symmetrical. It's very, very one-sided. Like the subjects are on this side. So that is asymmetrical in a sense.
咁呢張相係特別嘅喎，因為佢又有對稱嘅構圖，係一個橫向嘅對稱構圖，譬如上下啦。但係如果你睇到嗰啲3個人咧，其實佢就喺嗰個1/3嗰個9宮格嗰度。
So there's no hard and fast rule. You can always break the rule of thirds. You can always break symmetry.
所以其實咧唔係話有一個叫做硬性嘅規定，你一定咧要用嗰個1/3嘅9宮格嘅構圖，或者係一個對稱嘅構圖，係可以有彈性嘅。
It's just these are simple tools and concepts to utilize to create more interesting images.
只不過咧係一啲基本嘅概念啦，你可以去利用，以至咧你去構圖咧更加有趣味同埋有目的。
So those are the main points I had for you guys. I think we're a little bit over time, but I want to open it up for questions if you had any, and be able to answer that for you guys. I hope I made sense. I know this was not very technical on your phone, but the whole point of this was to show you that it's not really actually about your phone. You can all press the button. I know you guys can. If you guys need help with like actual like settings and stuff, maybe I'll do that in the second lesson. But I wanted to give you guys the tools to create good photos with any tool that you had, any phone that you had, not based on settings, not based on anything like that. Because with these concepts, that will already elevate like your photography. So hopefully this was helpful. And yeah, I'm open to questions. And yes, I can send this PowerPoint in a link. I'll send it to CMT team who can CMT, yeah.
好多謝大家今日參與啦。我雖然咧過咗啲嘅時間，我希望今日同大家嘅講解咧對你有得益有幫助。咁如果你想有問題嘅，而家都可以去俾大家5分鐘去問，好唔好啊？咁我將呢一個 PowerPoint 咧都會交俾我哋嘅教會，我哋會放喺網站嘅，所以大家咧可以去 SFCAC.org， 包括上次嗰個嘅美容嘅 PowerPoint 同埋嘅嗰啲嘅 recipe 啊 mask 都會擺上去，所以大家留意個網站咯，好冇？大家有冇問題啊？
我想問下咧，如果我要影張相咁樣，但係咧冇得選擇一定係背光嘅話咧，咁我可以點樣做到好睇啲，即係可以睇到個人咧？
即係你係冇其他 option， 一定個人係喺個窗門前邊嘅。係。你冇得轉一轉個人。
如果可以轉個人嘅話，咁係即係一定係要個 side， 即係佢個 face 個 side 向個 window 啊，定係點樣咧？
Yes.
Okay, Erin, can I translate in English first?
Yeah.
So
can I speak in English?
If I have to take that picture and it has to be against the light, what can I do to make it better?
Yeah, so my answer to that is I would firstly just, is it like at any way possible to move the person so they're not in front of the window? That would be my first thing to do. Not change my camera setting or anything. I would change the direction of my light.
我唔會去嘗試去操控個相機，去改嗰個相機嘅光暗啊嗰啲去調校。我係一定會係移動個人先咯。
Okay, thank you.
So, but let's say, like, you have to take a picture in front of a window like that, like you're in the window, then that would be when I use the slider that I taught you about in terms for exposure. because there will be maybe a sweet spot where the background is not super bright and the person is just bright enough, but it's still not ideal.
咁所以咧，盡量咧都係移動個人，然後我先會再調校正話教大家嗰個嘅光暗曝光嘅嗰個方法。
Oh yeah, because sometimes so I was work with a singer the party I will be volunteer. Sometimes they was ask was we got the big picture for everybody, and sometimes no choice. And then was I for my experience, I have something happens like you are talking about the backlight. So that was after take the picture, they said, oh no, I can't see my face. And so that's what I have a question. That was good to know. So next time I was let them maybe turn some space but sometimes it's very hard because of the big group.
Yeah, that's why it's hard. Group photos are hard because you're confined by space. So as much as possible, move people away from being in front of the window and try to even you go from the window. It helps. Anything helps because the absolute worst is if you're shooting straight at the window.
Okay.
Yeah, but how about using the light? So like the prof was and sometimes the light was can help or no?
You could, but that gets into advanced photography. Are you asking about using other lights?
Yes.
You can. You can bring in other lights, like turning on the lights in the room or something like that. You could, but you run into other issues because sometimes when you turn on the lights, maybe that actually causes reflection in the window. Sometimes the window is sunlight. So the sun is still going to be stronger than any light you can turn on inside. So it's still going to be too bright when you shoot on your phone.
Okay.
All right. Thank you.
Okay.
Sorry, we are really running out of time, and I know you have a lot of questions. So don't forget, we will have part 2 and even part 3. Okay, so just stay tuned. I don't want to keep everyone for too long, but I just want to thank you, Erin, again, and thank you for coming. So give her a round of applause. Thank you so much for presenting such a great, thoughtful presentation.